You're listening to Drug Positive, the risk reduction and benefit enhancement podcast removing shame and stigma to save lives and end the drug war. Welcome, everyone. I'm Emanuel Sferios, and this is the most important episode of Drug Positive we've produced so far. 60,000 people a year are dying in the U.S. from so-called drug overdoses, which are now the number one cause of death among people under 50, last year overtaking even car accidents. Why? We have carefully constructed this episode to answer that question and also explain, in a persuasive and convincing way, exactly what we need to do to solve the problem. We start by talking to Dennis Cauchon from Harm Reduction, Ohio about the fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl and its analogs are powerful synthetic opioids and are the proximate cause of the increase in drug-related fatalities. They're being added to the illegal drug supply, and they're killing people. And what this means is that we're not actually witnessing an overdose crisis. We're witnessing a poisoning crisis. Tens of thousands of people each year are being poisoned because there are no regulations, no controls over illegal drugs. Prohibition is causing this problem, and it needs to end. But how do we end prohibition? How do we regulate illegal drugs without making the problem worse? Well, the very fact that we assume regulating drugs might make the problem worse shows our deeply ingrained prejudices and false beliefs. We've been conditioned by drug war propaganda to believe that drugs are evil, that they have no benefits and only risks, and therefore that the people who use them are either sick or sinners. Having been influenced this way, we refuse to consider that perhaps, for most of the people who choose to use them, drugs may be improving their lives. And yes, this even applies to heroin. And so in this podcast, we also hear from a mother who tells the story of her daughter's death, a result of being cut off from prescription opiates and forced onto the street to obtain the only medicine that helped relieve her symptoms of severe anxiety.
Jack got on the phone and she said, "I just had to say I love you no matter what, Mom, no matter what."
And we speak to Dr. Torsten Passy, who helped establish heroin maintenance programs in Germany. Dr. Passy describes new studies suggesting that heroin may be the best medicine to relieve symptoms of severe PTSD, or for people with genetic or epigenetic conditions that cause chronic anxiety.
One illusion of the usual population is that heroin is inebriating you. This is true for the first 3 weeks. Later on, you don't have any inebriation anymore. People are completely sober. This shows that the symptom suppressing effect of heroin is still there, but the inebriation is gone. So it's an initial side effect.
Many people still believe that heroin users are simply selfish, hedonistic pleasure seekers who don't care about being productive citizens and contributing to their communities. Why is that? We hear one answer from best-selling author and addiction treatment specialist Gabor Mate, who says drug users are the number one psychological scapegoat in our culture.
The deepest human discomfort is shame. So if we perceive something in us that we don't like, then one way to protect ourselves from shame, to defend ourselves, is to project that something onto somebody else.
This episode challenges you to rethink your understanding of drugs and prohibition. It addresses head-on the worst crisis of death our culture faces. We are killing ourselves because of our prejudices, and also simply because of the inertia of outdated institutions like NIDA and the DEA. You know, it's worth mentioning that there is no equivalent of the DEA in other countries. In Europe, for example, their ministries of drug control are staffed by doctors and public health officials, whereas the DEA is filled with law enforcement and former military. What are they doing making decisions about drugs? What do they know? Nothing. They're warriors. They're fighting a war. They shoot and kill and infiltrate and disrupt, and sometimes even take over and control those they consider the enemy. We need to abolish the DEA. They're an outdated, unnecessary institution fighting an unwinnable war, and all their press conferences showing pictures of a ton of seized cocaine or El Chapo in handcuffs will not make us safer. That's why there's so many former DEA and law enforcement professionals who have quit and are now speaking out against the drug war and against prohibition. We're going to devote an entire show soon to effective strategy for ending the drug war. That's such an important question. But right now, this show is about convincing you and your family and friends of the change that we need to make in our laws and in ourselves. This episode contains extended clips from interviews I did for my upcoming documentary, MDMA the Movie. You might be wondering why a documentary about MDMA includes interviews with people talking about heroin. Well, that's because MDMA the Movie is really a drug policy reform documentary. It centers around MDMA, but the goal, just like the goal of this podcast, is to end the drug war. We're crowdfunding right now for post-production costs, so please go to donate.mdmathemovie.com and consider making a donation. We also have 21 minutes of edited footage there that you can watch. And now, my favorite part of the podcast, the pre-interview chat with my wife and co-host, Tatiana Makovkin.
Hello, everybody.
How are you doing, Tatiana?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little bit, I guess you could say, stressed about getting ready for Burning Man. It's a good kind of stress, but
you are out in the heat all day long, it seems, working on your Burning Man projects.
Yeah, I'm building a building just to fill people in. It's actually something that I haven't seen done before. The way that I'm building it is something that I'm experimenting with and inventing. So that feels a little risky.
Yeah, you're using foam board like a
insulation
hexayurt type material to make a triple story.
It's like a castle. It looks like a castle.
It is a castle, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's called rigid insulation board is the name of the building material, and people make hexayurts out of it.
But you're making a theater.
Yeah, it's a theater that the castle structure that I'm describing, the tower, is going to encapsulate the stage. So there's a little stage inside there, and there's a backstage and side entrances.
And what is the name of your theater?
The Amanita Playhouse.
There's a drug reference in there.
It's like a mushroom.
Lots of people have taken mushrooms, but very few people have actually taken Amanita mushrooms.
Yeah, I've never tried Amanita, but of course, if I get the opportunity, I will. But
they're very easy to identify. The red with the white spots on it.
Yeah, classic mushrooms. But I grew up around those mushrooms, so they're very beloved to me on a personal level.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so what did you think of the interview with Dennis Cauchon?
I was really impressed by the open-mindedness. He's really on the same page as you and other cutting-edge harm reduction people, it seems.
And he's never used drugs, kind of the exception to our episode 0, where I talk about most harm reduction workers coming from the drug-using community.
Right, because he's using logic to reach the same conclusions, because it's what works. Harm reduction.
I think being an investigative reporter for so many years with USA Today, you really get exposed to a lot of different perspectives, and you can really learn what's going on. Then that's what he says. He says he decided to found Harm Reduction Ohio because through his work as an investigative reporter, he learned the drug war is causing more death than anything else.
Right. The conversation that you were able to have with him was non-judgmental, and it was with consideration for people who actually have found good medicinal uses for opiates. So,
it's a radical concept.
Yeah, it expands the conversation a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the idea of the dealer education campaign was a very cutting edge idea that I think just welled up organically in this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's really important to reach out to dealers and help educate them on how they can keep their customers safe. This is a heavy episode we're doing right now. But the next episode we kind of sketched out coming up in 1 week. That's going to be pretty light. We'll call that the fun episode. We start out with a live interview with Shane Moss. We were at the global premiere last month of his documentary Psychonautics, where he takes a lot of different psychedelics.
Shout out to Shane. He's a stand-up comic, and he has a whole show about psychedelics, and it is so funny. I've seen it twice and laughed through the whole way, both times.
Yeah, and we also interview the first person ever to take MDMA that we know of.
Breaking news in the history of MDMA.
That's right. That's kind of fun. I think also we'll have our first mini episode of Your Hosts on Drugs, where we will play the
experience
dragonfly.
The adventure of the dragonfly.
That's right. That's right. We save the life of a dragonfly while we're on LSD.
Spoilers.
It's very funny. So that's coming up next week, and you can subscribe to us so you don't miss that. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Mixcloud, Stitcher. We just got on Stitcher, and other places as well.
And a reminder, you can ask us questions through email at drugpositive@gmail.com.
Great. You think that's good?
What about a risk reduction tip for the week?
Oh, that's right. We have to give a risk reduction tip. We're going to do one every week. Let's see. How about the classic? When you're taking MDMA, pay attention to your body temperature. About 30 people a year in this country die after they take MDMA, and 95% of those cases are heat stroke. They happen in hot environments, at summer festivals, or in hot nightclubs. And here's what's really going on there. It's not that the MDMA causes your body temperature to rise up to 107 degrees, but everyone who goes out dancing aerobically in a hot environment, everyone who's done this experiences getting too hot. When your body temperature gets to be 100 degrees, you feel it. And then you take a break. You're like, whoa, I got to go sit down. You go to the bar, get some water, go to the chill room. But when you're on MDMA, the euphoria can mask your symptoms of overheating. And then your body temperature keeps rising. 103, 104. When your body temperature gets to 105, you collapse. You might start having a seizure on the dance floor. Now you're in a life-threatening hyperthermic situation. So you got to pay attention. You got to pay attention to the people around you as well. Take breaks from dancing. Make sure you drink water, not too much water, but enough that you keep yourself hydrated. Sports drinks are better. And of course, dose does matter. Dosing is a whole nother harm reduction tip for MDMA that we can do in another episode. All right. Well, let's get to the serious episode. This is Dennis Cauchon. Dennis Cauchon, the founder of Harm Reduction Ohio. And as a fellow founder, I wanted to say thank you for what you do. I was really impressed with your articles, particularly about carfentanil in the drug supply in Ohio. Maybe you can tell us a bit about how and why you started Harm Reduction Ohio. And thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I was a national reporter and editor at USA Today for 30 years. And enjoyed it, traveled all over the country, did a lot of stories on the drug war, the World Trade Center, O.J. Simpson, hurricanes, the whole kit and caboodle. And then about 2 years ago, I just sort of rethought about how can I contribute the most value to what's going on in society. And I said, instead of working nationally, which I had been, there's a slaughter underway in my home state of Ohio. I mean, the overdose death is just astounding. So we really had no statewide drug policy group, much less harm reduction group. So Harm Reduction Ohio is what I started, and the reception has been even far better than I imagined.
What year was that when you started it?
Beginning of 2017.
Wow, that's incredible, because the increase in drug-related deaths started many years before that, and there was no organization until you started
Correct.
One. That's crazy. Were there needle exchanges at least?
There was one in Cleveland that started in 1995, but that was pretty much it. Then there had been a lot of attempts, and finally it got thrown in at the last minute to a 2015 budget bill. That legalized it. And now, by my count, we have 14 programs operating in 16 counties at 21 locations. And we're actually hosting a first syringe program conference where everyone will come together at the Ohio State College of Public Health in November.
Great. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your organization does? Because you're not specifically a needle exchange organization. You do more of the broader work, I think, yeah?
Right. We're essentially an advocacy organization rather than a service organization. So we don't operate syringe programs, for example, we try to make them possible, pass laws that allow them to function well. But we're sort of finding that we have to do some service as well, because if we don't do it, it won't get done. Particularly naloxone distribution is becoming a priority of ours because we really don't have any of it,
right.
Even though we've lost 17,000 people in 5 years. Right now, there's no one going into drug-using communities, homeless populations, with a few people who don't know they're not supposed to do it, and a few wonderful local county health departments that somehow have done it on a sporadic basis.
I've always been an advocate of just do it. Better to ask forgiveness than permission. We need these services out there to save lives. And, I started Dance Safe that way, started doing drug checking in public for ecstasy users without getting any permission, got a needle exchange lawyer with the expectation I would get arrested and have to defend myself. And in the past 20 years, no one has ever been arrested in over 24 states that with Dance Safe who are doing pill testing. So it's just, sometimes laws are just outdated, and everyone, including the feds, realize this is important. And so even though there's these technical laws about paraphernalia or whatever, we're not going to bust harm reduction people.
And we have actually talked about that, and we're going to do it if our cooperative efforts don't work. But what we're trying to do as an advocacy group is make it possible for everyone to do it.
Right. Well, we need to get Narcan off the prescription list so that it can be sold by anyone. We would love to sell Narcan through the Dance Safe website. We sell 10,000 fentanyl testing strips a month. But because of regulations on Narcan, we can't do that.
And as you probably know, the FDA actually has that quote-unquote fast track to bring it over the counter.
Oh, great. Oh, good.
But, it's been on the fast track for a year, so I don't know what. But I think it definitely should be over the counter, or what we're working with legislators is just to add that naloxone is exempt from this licensing requirement.
Right.
Just naloxone, nothing else.
Right. All right, so we're talking about naloxone and we're talking about testing strips. Really, this is a discussion about the fentanyl crisis. Most of this increase in drug-related deaths is a result of fentanyl, or more properly, fentanyls, because there are various analogs out there. Tell us about fentanyl and its analogs and the impact that it's having right now. I'm very impressed with your perspective, your articles about what's going on in Ohio and how we, for example, we need to start looking at this not so much as an overdose crisis, but as a poisoning crisis. Can you talk about that a bit?
Fentanyl is valuable in illegal markets because it's small. It's not because it's the first choice among drug users, but it's easy to hide from law enforcement. It's easy to smuggle. That's its advantage, because if you look at the research as well as talk to users, it creates less euphoria than heroin. It has a shorter lifespan. However, it's inexpensive and small, and it can be made in a room.
Right.
So it's entirely a rational economic response to pressure on larger, relatively safer drugs.
And this is a result of prohibition, of course.
Yes. The market will respond with other chemicals that could be, likely will be worse.
Well, it already
Just
has.
like, you go from opium to morphine to heroin.
Right. So tell us about the crisis in Ohio right now. You have a lot of charts in your articles on harmreductionohio.org. It's amazing the increase in fatalities, and it parallels the rise in fentanyl-laced drugs that you discovered through getting data from your local authorities.
I just got data from the 3 state crime labs. What I learned, and it went back to 2014, is that illegal drug markets are dynamic and fast changing. Like in March 2016, there's no fentanyl. And then bam, fentanyl just goes up fast, and then it declines quickly.
What struck me is the parallel in this chart between the amount of fentanyl in the confiscated drugs paralleling the number of overdose deaths, because that really proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that these are drug poisonings.
Right. Of course, as you know, the CDC doesn't call them overdoses. They are called unintentional drug poisonings. they are poisonings in the official data. So what I've been advocating is look at the data before it goes into someone's body. Look at the poison before it goes into the body rather than after they're dead. Maybe you can prevent them from being dead. So because I couldn't get authorities to adopt this, that I just, I got the data myself and analyzed it. And then I overlaid percentage of fentanyl and percentage of carfentanil and cocaine and heroin, etc., with the line of death. And they they mimic each other.
Yeah.
It was particularly vivid that as carfentanil came in, the line went up.
Right.
The first study I did was in Dayton. Early 2017, Dayton became the center of the world, the heroin capital of the world, because overdoses soared. And everyone was like, opioid use and heroin use. But it turned out, when I actually got the data, it was cocaine and fentanyl, especially cocaine and carfentanil that was killing people. It wasn't heroin. And it wasn't really even cocaine. It was the fentanyl and...
Well, let me ask you this, because this is something that many of us in the harm reduction world are talking about. Who is putting fentanyl or carfentanil into cocaine, and why? Because cocaine users typically are not looking for an opiate high. It doesn't seem like it would make your product more desirable if you put fentanyl in it. And also, so many people are dying. It seems obvious to me that you don't want to kill your customers. And once word gets out that your cocaine is killing people, your customers aren't going to come back. So either this is contamination or someone's trying to kill drug users.
It's in meth too. In fact, it's in all Ohio drugs except marijuana. It's across the drug supply, and it's pretty much in the drug supply coming from Mexico as well as other places. When I first started posting on the website, drug users would post, "That's a bunch of bullshit. What do you think? You don't know anything." But, they kept dying, and now it's conventional wisdom. Oh, of course it is. Everyone has a different theory as to why it is, and there's probably about 5 theories, which I think are all true. It's just a question of to what extent. Like the contamination theory is popular among hung reducers, which is kind of called, or sometimes called like the sloppy dealer theory, in that they were cutting the heroin with fentanyl and then they used the same machine to cut cocaine. And I think there's some of that, but I think when dealers aren't getting sloppier and the line's going up.
You would think they would clean up their act if their customers started dying.
I have thought of starting like a dealer education program.
Oh, yeah. That's absolutely true. We've always felt at DanceSafe that the most important people to get this information, to get testing kits to, are dealers. They take on a responsibility for their customers. It's more important they test their drugs before they sell them. They'll save a lot of lives that way if they do that.
As you probably know, but I found no dealer who did, fentanyl, and even more so carfentanil, cannot safely be cut or diluted in powder form. It has to be converted to a liquid to evenly disperse it. And you do that with an instrument called a rotary evaporator. It's a common instrument. But I've checked, like when they seize these sites, do they ever have a rotary evaporator? And I found no. So this is one level of education that needs to be done.
There's a phenomenon we call the chocolate chip cookie effect, and this is why I believe so many even seasoned daily heroin users are dying, because a taster shot may no longer indicate the strength of the entire bag.
And what I wanted to do is an animated video that shows how this chocolate chip effect occurs and how when it's in liquid, it gets evenly distributed.
Right.
And, rotary evaporators aren't that expensive. And it's not really that hard to do.
This is very interesting to me, because are we actually talking about trying to encourage dealers to mix their fentanyl evenly in their drugs rather than get rid of the fentanyl entirely? Shouldn't we just be saying, come on, fentanyl is way too dangerous to be cutting into drugs, and we want dealers to sell pure drugs as pure as possible, not mixes of drugs?
Well, I would say that too. However, heroin is big and bulky. Mm-hmm. So with law enforcement as it is, people are going to sell fentanyl because it's rational in the market to sell something that's small.
So are you distributing fentanyl testing strips as part of your program?
Yes. In fact, that's one of the first things that we started. We have different distribution programs going around the state.
Great.
So, and the reason I started with that is because it's inexpensive and I wanted to get a win early so people would understand. In California and New York on the coast, people know what harm reduction is. It's not really even in the vernacular of Ohio. So there's a certain education that's going on.
Right. Yeah, I do want to say, too, I led a study that we just finished at UCSF assessing the effectiveness of a variety of fentanyl testing strips on the market. We tested 5 different strips from 3 different companies and found out that the BTNX strips were by far the most effective. They're the only strips that can detect carfentanil as well as fentanyl and most of its analogs. So,
are there any analogs that it misses?
There were a couple. Sufentanil, for example, a very rare analog of carfentanil that it couldn't pick up. But the vast majority, they did. And so I do want to say again for our listeners that you can buy these strips on the DanceSafe website. That's dancesafe.org. And that particularly now, it's very important to test your cocaine. And as I just learned, your meth as well.
In fact, I believe that these test strips are even more valuable for cocaine and meth because people don't expect it and they don't want it. Whereas if you're a heroin user, you kind of expect it. It's important to know that it's in there, but you're not going to reject it because it's in like 80%,
right,
90% of heroin in Ohio. How about if we get back to your theories, to the theories on why it's so? They're all true. It's just a matter of which is most prominent. So this one is like speedballs, and that's happening more in Ohio, partly as a safety measure. Some drug users have told me that, or it's folk wisdom, that fentanyl lowers your heart and breath, whereas stimulant offsets it and brings it up.
Let's be clear. That is totally false. Speedballs will increase your risk of death. We know that cocaine, for example, affects calcium channels in the heart. And if you increase your tolerance, say, or you think you are, to cocaine by taking a heroin along with it, allowing you to do more cocaine, you're just going to increase your chances of an overdose.
Of course, that's what I tell them. The John Belushi example, that there's no evidence, but I'm just telling you that that's folk wisdom out there. There's also a shift because the heroin supply is so dangerous. People are shifting to cocaine and meth.
Well, then let me ask you this. Your chart here, or on your articles, talk about confiscated drugs. If the state crime lab in Ohio is testing confiscated drugs and they find both meth and heroin in a sample, are they calling that meth-contaminated heroin or heroin-contaminated meth? And how do they know what's going on in that case?
They aren't calling it anything. They're just saying what's in it. It's me who's sort of characterizing it that way from talking to people.
Right. Well, do you have a theory on why Ohio? I mean, these numbers are incredible. If you can talk about the statistics, the amount of fentanyl and carfentanil over the last few years in Ohio and the number of deaths as a result is far greater than even the rest of the country combined. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, let me tell you what I think the primary cause of this contamination is, which I think you'll disagree with, is I think that the Mexican supply chain is contaminated.
Well, then why aren't the statistics the same in all the other states? Why is Ohio so much radically more contaminated than anywhere else?
That's a good question. And I don't really have an answer.
Wouldn't that indicate that the fentanyl is being added locally rather than in Mexico?
That's a good point. I just got this carfentanil data like last week.
Right.
And I had assumed that carfentanil was a problem everywhere. I just hadn't looked at the other states. But I got the CDC data, which shows that the carfentanil death rate in Ohio is 2,000% greater than in the 9 other states studied.
Right.
21 times. I've never seen data like this before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like off the charts. It's inexplicable.
I agree. And I can tell you that because I do all of the shipping for the Dance Safe fentanyl testing strips, that Ohio is our number one customer. Pennsylvania is number two, and they're a distant second. We send more strips to Ohio than anywhere else in the country, which is good. To some degree, people in Ohio are realizing that their drugs are contaminated, and they're trying to take steps to, check them first. But
but if you think about it, Emanuel, if it's being added in Ohio and it's being come in, from China or Canada or wherever, there's no reason that wouldn't also be true in other states. They have the U.S. mail.
Well, except like you said, it's a very volatile market that changes quickly. You've got one.
I don't know. It's quite possible it's being added here, and there's been a couple of big busts related to that, but there have in other states too.
I've heard from some colleagues that they believe fentanyls are being added in every step along the supply chain.
Yes.
And hopefully that will end soon. I do know that I had the opportunity, interestingly, for the first time to witness one of the drug markets on the darknet. I was at a friend's house and he showed me one, and we were looking around at all the different drugs you could buy with Bitcoin. And the interesting thing about it is that the market had made an announcement at the top that in May of this year, 2018, they no longer allowed the sale of fentanyl or its analogs. They made the decision because of the number of deaths to stop selling them.
Well, carfentanil deaths have declined pretty significantly. It hasn't gone away, but it's declined, and perhaps that's an explanation. I wonder how many dark web places are there, and can there be sort of a social norm that develops?
Right. There's hope that it might lessen. Of course, our harm reduction work might also help lessen the crisis. But let's be real. In the end, we need to end prohibition and figure out appropriate ways to regulate these substances. Each drug needs to be regulated differently, of course. But we're just putting Band-Aids on a crisis that is caused by the drug war.
Prohibition kills. Always has, always will, is doing so right now.
Right. Well, this might be a good time to listen to an interview that I conducted with a mother who lost her daughter to heroin. Very emotional story. Let's listen to this. It's about 10 minutes long because I think it's a good segue to a discussion on the solutions. I think it gives people a good sense of how and why people are using opiates. This is Donna May.
Jack was born on July 14th, 1978, and was my little girl, the one that I wanted. To give birth to her and know that it was a baby girl, it was just the fulfillment of all my dreams. But that's where the comfort zone ended. She was a very demanding child, needed a lot of attention, something that I wasn't used to because her sibling just wasn't like that.
How did you first learn that Jack was using opiates?
I first learned of Jack's opiate use from her. She had taken a fall down a flight of stairs into a concrete basement floor and was injured quite severely. And she told me that they had prescribed OxyContin, and she said to me, "Mom, this is really good stuff. I don't have the social anxiety that I once struggled with." She said, "I'm having no problems taking the girls to school and interacting with the other parents. I'm not anxious about going to grocery shopping. My house is clean. It just seems like I can function again." And I said, "Oh my God, this is wonderful. Like, you are finally the normal girl that I have always dreamt of." And I mean, it was going so well. She was calling me all the time. We would have typical conversations that a mother and daughter would have. We talked about all the girly things. I was really enjoying it. And I said to her, "Talk to your doctor about this. Like, this is amazing. We want to make sure that you stay level like this. This is great." She had been taking other medications, mood-altering medications and antidepressants and things, and they weren't doing anything for her. And the moment she got on Oxycontin, she seemed normal. Jack went to the doctors and told him about this being her miracle cure, and he cut her off cold. And our relationship started to plummet again. It just went downhill so fast, so quickly. She ended up having to go to the street to get her opiates and took anything that she could get her hands on, any form of drug that was going to give her that feeling of normalcy that she couldn't attain on her own. From all of that, she ended up on fentanyl patches, cooking and injecting. And that's when I realized that she was in real danger and began trying to get her the help that she needed. And I couldn't find it. It was nowhere to be found. I mortgaged my house twice, tried to get her into different treatment centers, put the deposits down, tried to get her to go, and failed both times. You know, I immediately approached her and said, this has to stop. You can't keep doing this. This is what addicts do. This isn't what my daughter does. And just facing her that way and seeing that desperation in her face, it's like, you can't take this away from me now. And my only thought was, I have to get her clean. She has to quit this, without understanding how entrenched she was in substance use. She needed this, and I didn't understand it. I thought it was a moral failing of hers that she could just stop on a dime. That ignorance caused her to stop talking to me about it and start hiding her addiction from me, and drove her underground and away from me. I got very, very angry. I wanted her to change and thought I knew best, and stopped giving her money, stopped communicating with her. I made it impossible for her to be at family functions because she was addicted. I didn't want her around. I even caused her children to be taken from her because I thought that social care would be better for them than being raised by a mother who was an addict. And that was the nail in Jack's coffin. She did not care about anything anymore. Nothing mattered, nothing at all. And especially me. I didn't matter to her anymore because of what I had done. Jack was on the streets for months. She prostituted herself, she stole, she did whatever it took to get the drugs that she needed. And all those actions made me want her away from me even more. I did not understand. I think that was my first awakening to what my stigma was doing to my daughter's life. I went to see my daughter. I snuck into the hospital hoping that she would let me see her. And I looked into the room and there was all these people around her that were helping her in the drug culture, and I was afraid to enter the room. All I saw was drug addicts, people that I feared, people I didn't understand. And I stood back across the hall and I remember looking in at these people thinking, how did my daughter end up like this? How did this happen? And I left. Hiding behind tough love is a very peaceful place to be. You know, it allows you all kinds of sanctuary, but it doesn't work for the child. I got a phone call January 9th, right after I got home, and it was Surrey Memorial Hospital again, and they said, Miss May, I'm sorry to tell you, but your daughter has a very serious infection. She's being rushed into emergency surgery to remove both of her legs, and we don't know that she's going to make it out of surgery. She's refusing to go into the operating room until she speaks with you. And Jack got on the phone and she said, I just had to say I love you no matter what, Mom, no matter what. And she hung up. And I was on the next flight and found her in critical care in the hospital and in an induced coma. And the doctors came in and informed me that they were unable to amputate because the infection had spread into the trunk of her body, and she was going to lose her life. It would only be a matter of weeks, they told me, maybe even just days. So when Jack woke up, one of my first questions was, what do you want to do with the time that's left? And without any emotion or thought or anything, she just turned her head around. She says, I need to teach you. I need to teach you what it's like to be me, to walk in my shoes and see through my eyes, because you just don't get it.
So, wow, powerful story, don't you think?
It's very, very powerful, and she tells it well.
Yeah, and I think it's a very classic story, too, whereby someone starts taking pharmaceutical opiates for physical pain and realizes that it has had a positive effect on their mental health. And so therefore they want to keep using it. But then as soon as their doctor finds out they're using it for emotional pain rather than physical pain, they are branded an addict, told there's something wrong with them, cut off immediately, and it turns them to the criminal markets.
Well, if you think about the saying of harm reduction, meet people where they're at. So the daughter and the mother described, in effect, the response of that doctor to it did not meet them where they were at and fulfill their needs.
Right. Right.
I think that crackdown, and health economists have tied the increase in overdose death to the reformulation of OxyContin in 2011. And the numbers in Ohio and nationally show that the more they've restricted the legal supply, the more people who have died, because people are getting pushed into harm's way. They're going from legal opioids, which they know what's in it, to ones where they have no idea, and it's killing them. I think it's a well-meant, I don't think it's a conspiracy, which I think that health professionals don't understand the way markets work, and they don't understand the consequences of their actions. And when they took this action, it had catastrophic consequences, catastrophic, that history will look back as a phenomenal error that they should have known. But dealing with these people every day, they're sincere and earnest, and they're excited in Ohio that they cut prescription opioid deaths by about 150 to 200 a year. The consequence was increasing total overdose deaths by 3,000 a year, but to them, it's not correlated.
Yeah, because they don't think things through.
It is.
Of course. You know, I think it's also very easy to blame pharmaceuticals. I think in this crisis, we look for easy scapegoats. We want to feel there's an easy solution. And particularly, we don't want to feel that the problem is our own attitude around drugs.
Drug users are sort of the remaining population that you can make stereotypes and generalities about, and it's considered okay. It's like saying gays are like, or blacks are like. I mean, There may be certain general commonalities, but they're different. Everyone's different and unique.
Yeah, you know, drug users are one of the greatest scapegoats in our society. And I think Gabor Mate said it well in an interview I did with him for my upcoming documentary. Let's listen to this clip from my interview with Gabor Mate.
Well, the deepest human discomfort is shame. And shame is a sense that there's something profoundly wrong with us. So if we perceive unconsciously something in us that we don't like, then one way to protect ourselves from shame, to defend ourselves, is to project that something onto somebody else. And that's the process of the moral judgments that we make of others. And as any number of psychologists or spiritual teachers will tell you, when we judge another, it's always about something that we don't like in ourselves. Now, when it comes to addiction, we live in a society that's highly addicted. A lot of people have behaviors that are intended to give them temporary pleasure, but which incur negative consequences in the long term. They're not about substances, but nevertheless which are escapes from themselves, escapes from their pain, and which incur negative consequences. And we do that through shopping, through work, through eating, through gambling, through extreme sports, through internet cruising, to any number of human activities can be addictive in a sense of soothing pain or discomfort temporarily, but causing negative consequences in the long term. Therefore, how convenient it is to identify a certain group of people as the addicts. And now we can offload on our opprobrium and our distaste and us disdain for those parts of ourselves onto these other people. So the whole ostracization and judgment of the drug addict ultimately has the global psychological benefit, if you like, of creating an other so that we don't have to look at ourselves.
What'd you think of that? You think he's right?
Human beings have a long history of scapegoating, whether it's witches or immigrants or some type of group. Drugs are the scapegoat. The medical model is sort of inconsistently challenged that. It's a disease or eliminates stigma, but they're diseased people. So interested to see how that actually works out, because I do think there's a movement to end stigma.
Right. So let's listen to another clip. I wanted to play for you, for the audience, Dr. Torsten Passy from Germany, who helped spearhead heroin maintenance programs in Germany, originally implemented in Switzerland and much more widespread in Switzerland. But there are a number of clinics throughout Germany that provide free heroin to addicts. So let's listen to this.
The issue with the heroin-assisted treatment, which is going on in Central Europe quite a lot, is that we don't have any medication which is suppressing the symptoms of severe PTSD. And it was found during the recent trials that heroin may be the appropriate agent for suppressing the symptoms of severe PTSD. And therefore, it seems the patients were addicted to heroin because it helps suppress their symptoms. And one illusion of the usual population is that heroin is inebriating you. It's giving you an inebriated state or something like that. This is true for the first 3 weeks. Later on, you don't have any inebriation anymore. The people are completely sober. I was kind of shocked at first when I saw them. I couldn't believe it. Did you inject right now 0.5 gram of pure heroin and you're sitting here like nothing happened? I said, with that, I didn't realize anything anymore since years. And this shows that the symptom suppressing effect of heroin is still there, but the inebriation is gone. So it's an initial side effect. Heroin is legalized in that way. There is a certain law in Germany which allows heroin-assisted treatment, and so it is rescheduled from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, but with some strict regulations about it. But we can handle it in the treatment center and can give it to patients, and they inject themselves in the treatment center with a regular dose which is chosen mainly by themselves, because they know most about the substance. And if it's not a dangerous dose, I wouldn't hinder that. And what is mostly important is you have a decrease of criminal actions by 99%. So they really don't do anything anymore in respect to being criminal and getting more money out of something or so. They could establish friendships again. They get back their dignity.
And there's no pretense of treatment. You're not telling them you have to quit. You just let them have their...
Yeah, exactly. That is a question which always comes up. When do you put them down on their medications? So we are looking at it more like having a diabetes person injecting insulin to provide a certain homeostasis in the organism, because you don't have insulin in us. And it was proven by scientific studies recently that a lot of these patients have an under-functioning endorphin system. And so you have to give them opiate agonists to treat their illness appropriately, because it's supplementing something his organism does not have.
In the U.S., the history of heroin...
Do you know that they had heroin-assisted treatment here in the 1920s?
I did know that, yeah.
And it took quite a while to prohibit that, because the physicians were against prohibiting it, because the people were functioning.
Right. So after listening to Torsten, what do you think about heroin maintenance programs? Because to me, I think this is really the solution in a lot of ways. We've got to remember, this is not take-home heroin. You remove the person from the criminal markets. You give them pure heroin. You let them inject however much they want in a safe environment. You have naloxone there in case they overdose. They have to wait a half an hour, and then they can get on with their daily life.
Heroin maintenance programs make obvious sense. Even safe consumption sites, which are like an interim step,
right,
are valuable. And hopefully the U.S. will have one soon. I know the Vancouver Insight just celebrated an anniversary, and it was like 3.6 million uses and no overdose deaths.
Right.
And that's people bringing in their own heroin and getting revived on occasion.
Yep.
So to actually know what people are taking, it's obvious the morbidity and mortality, so to speak, would be greatly improved. And it's a shame that Ohio can't be a leader in that just because our culture is not innovative. But I do think we'll be a follower when other places start it.
Yeah, safe injection sites are great first step. So are drug checking sites. But what I love about heroin maintenance, and it wasn't spoken about in my interview with Torsten, is that if they become widespread, what the result, and this is why they first implemented it in Switzerland 15 years ago and why they keep on renewing it. If you remove most of the addicts from the criminal markets, you shrink the drug supply because dealers then go out of business. And it results in far fewer new addicts. And so it's not just that you're helping the individual heroin user. In Switzerland, they didn't even know that was going to be a result. That was a surprise result. What they wanted to do was dry up the heroin market. So heroin
and that's been well documented, happened in England as well. So I do think you're correct. That would be a result.
Right. And so do you think it could be the fact that there's so much corruption that there are authorities in this country who do not want to see the illegal drug supply dry up because they're actually making money themselves? And so implementing heroin maintenance for the direct purpose of eliminating the illegal markets might have great resistance, including elements within our government.
I don't think so. Although there's a financial, there's two drug cultures. Everyone talks about like drug user culture, but the anti-drug culture is even larger and is very lucrative to participate in that. But I think the incentives are less nefarious than you might, because I don't think they truly understand the harm they're doing. So to have a conspiracy, you actually have to know what you're doing. And I think it's mostly just bias, and people tell themselves stories that make them feel good about themselves.
Well, I know that profit motive is very, very powerful. I live in Grass Valley, California, and our county here in Nevada County is a cannabis growing county. And when the original recreational legalization bill was put up as a proposition, most of the growers here opposed it because they didn't want the price of cannabis to go down. And it was very disappointing and frustrating for me, position being, are you kidding? You would rather see people languish in prison than have the price of cannabis go down? So
economics is a powerful incentive, and we're going to have the same thing in the next 2 years in Ohio. Right now, we're rolling out medical marijuana in a terribly botched thing. It was supposed to start next month. It isn't. But people have invested a lot of money in medical marijuana. But it's likely that full legalization will be on the ballot in November 2020. And I have a feeling these people who have invested a lot of money in medical marijuana are going to oppose full legalization.
Right. You know what I tell people is cannabis ought to be free because there's something very unique about cannabis, and that is there is no agricultural crop that produces as much product per acre or per plant than cannabis. You can grow one plant and you can have enough cannabis for you and your family and many of your friends for the entire year. It should be cheaper than tomatoes. And the only reason it's not is because of prohibition. So I tell my growing friends, look, if we lived in an ideal world, you would not be able to make a living selling cannabis. Why would I buy cannabis from you? I can grow a plant in my backyard and have as much as I want,
They call it weed for a reason.
Exactly. And, they've shown that it helps with pain and gets people off of more dangerous drugs. It's a no-brainer.
I think even more important than what it does is what it doesn't do. It doesn't kill you.
Exactly.
I mean, and I've seen no research, maybe why doesn't it kill you? I mean, everything else kills you in extreme amounts, whether it's vitamin A and carrot juice or water. But is there some property that can be transferred from marijuana into other things to self-limit?
They actually did discover a lethal dose of cannabis. You want to know what it is?
It falls on you?
That's exactly right. A 10-pound bale falling on your head from 10 stories up. That's the joke.
Ba-dum-bum.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was great talking to you, Dennis. Thank you again for all your work. And I am now, I bookmarked your site, and I'm going to check it regularly for the amazing articles that you write and put up. I want to tell everyone, www.harmreductionohio.org. Dennis, your organization does fantastic work, so thank you.
Thanks, Emanuel.